So welcome. Thanks for coming out to the Whalen Library this evening. Thanks for braving the parking lot. Tonight we are excited to have Professor Elizabeth Sherman here to talk to us about biodiversity, evolution, and all the species we have. She studies the diversity of structure, function, and behavior of animals, both individually and as part of larger systems. Known for her work in amphibian physiological ecology, she's published in the Journal of Comparative Physiology, Comparative Biochemistry and Physiology, the Journal of Thermal Biology, and others. She's received grants from the NSF, the American Wildlife Research Foundation, and the Kellogg Foundation, and the Department of Education. She completed her PhD at the University of Vermont, and she taught at Bennington College from 1978 until 2020. If you have a cell phone, make sure it's on silent. If you're joining us on Zoom, put your questions in the chat and I will raise my hand and read them aloud. And we are recording. I'm recording Professor Sherman and her slides for Wacam and our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch and share again. Now I'll hand it over to you. I got a plug.
I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I was a little concerned that I'd be talking to Arlene and Bill, but you are fabulous. We're going to a bar afterwards. And I know that there's a lot of Wyman Petrie posse here, and I'm and a former student of mine. So a conglomeration, and thank you, Courtney. I am here to come on. You know you want to look at it. What are you studying? Typically, when I give talks, those guys would bring the sort of median age down for a few decades, but it's their planet. So I want to celebrate the diversity of life with y'all. And when I was thinking about how to start this, no, they're not gonna. When I was thinking about how to start this talk, I wanted to get a really sexy video of some cool organism doing some really cool thing. And you can imagine the choices that I had now with the internet, all these critter things that one can find. So I wanted to choose something that would make you say, oh my goodness, how did that come about? And this is what I chose. I am gonna turn out the lights right here so y'all can see how truly disgusting this is. This is a cockroach in the sort of in the background. Here's one of his eyes. Here's his thorax and the rest of him, and it is a male. I can tell that. Later I'll show you. And in the foreground is this aptly named jewel wasp. All right, either come in or stop stalking me. I promise not to interrupt anymore. I just am wanting humans. Anyway, this is a jewel wasp. And here you can see one of her compound eyes and the other one. Here's her thorax, and that's where all her limbs come off. And this is her abdomen, and it's attached to the thorax by this, you can hardly see it, what we call a little petiole, like a wasp waist. And what she's doing right now is injecting a portion of the central nervous system of that cockroach. And now we're going to watch a video, and this is going to take me a while to figure out, because first I have to get rid of this, then I have to get rid of that, and then it should pop up or not. Okay, good. We're gonna make it nice and big. Now, come on. This footage was taken in a laboratory, but this is what happens in the wild. So here's our cockroach. And here's our jewel wasp. Oh, good heavens. Oh my gosh. There we go. So the wasp is going to approach the cockroach, and the cockroach is going to fight. But right now, she's injecting a portion of the nervous system that controls his front legs. And she's injecting him with a venom that has a neurotransmitter that our bodies would recognize. This particular part of the nervous system controls the cockroach's front legs, so he stops moving them and pushing her away so that she's able to make a second injection a little higher up in the nervous system. And this injection too is composed of neurotransmitters that our bodies would recognize. Now that causes the cockroach, the second injection, to stand there for about 30 minutes grooming itself and apparently smearing antimicrobial stuff on itself. But then after about 30 minutes, the cockroach becomes very docile. In the meantime, the wasp female goes off and finds a burrow in the laboratory, a little glass jar. And then as sort of the penultimate indignity, she bites off a part of his antennae and sucks out some of the very nutritious hemolymph. And he just stands there, very docile. Now, cockroaches typically don't behave this way if you ever run into a cockroach. And then she walks her compliant cockroach, her obedient cockroach, into her burrow. And she lays a single egg on one of his legs. And there it is, you can see it. And he's just standing there taking it. There's the egg. And then she covers up her burrow and flies off, and that's the extent of her maternal care. After a couple of days, the egg hatches into a larva. Notice how still this cockroach is. The larva then eats its way into the cockroach and consumes the innards of the cockroach as it grows. And it's laying down fibers. At some point, this larva, worm-like thing, will become a pupa. And after about 40 days, out pops a brand new, happy, healthy queen out of this dead cockroach carcass. And the whole thing starts all over again. Of all the gin joints in all the land, I chose to show you this. And I hope you're saying, holy cow, how did that come about? So that's what we're going to talk about. And let me go back to my slides. And what
Today's economy, I'm sorry, but you got it wrong. There's a little known trend attracting millions of dollars a day right now called Audible uploads. Audible, owned by Amazon, is one of the biggest sources of audiobooks and podcasts in the world. And Audible uploads can generate ongoing income with significant growth potential. In fact, they're one of the best ways for everyday people to start an extra income stream in their spare time.
I do this on a part-time basis, about 5 to 10 hours a week. I earn about $40,000 a year. There's no other job that pays with that little time.
I'm at just about $1,500 for this month, and that's only with one book. And it was a book I wasn't even going to publish.
So you want to know how you can get started with Audible uploads too? Well, give me 60 seconds and I'll show you. Hey, my name's Amy Sanderson, and my friends the Mickelson twins here became multimillionaires in their 20s. Not by winning the lottery, but by taking advantage of Audible uploads. And since then, they've generated over $100 million online, been named the 19th fastest growing company in America by Inc.com, and most importantly, helped tens of thousands of others learn about Audible uploads too, myself included. For a limited time, they're sharing how you can take advantage of this little-known Audible secret to create more freedom in your life with their short, free video training that covers their one upload method. And you can access the video instantly by clicking the link below and entering on the next page. Now, I don't know how long they'll keep this up for, but for now, it's completely free. And I promise it's the most eye-opening video you'll ever see on how possible it is to get Audible uploads working for you, in much less time than any online business I've ever seen before. Did you know that Amazon's created well over 40,000 millionaires? And at least 3 times that many people making 6 figures? Even if, like me, you're just interested in making a little extra each month. The good news is, more people are making more money today faster
How
and
did
easier
all
than ever
this
before.
diversity
But how are they doing
come
it? Well,
about?
that's exactly what
This
you're
will
going to
shock
find
you,
out in the
I
free
know.
video training.
But
Plus,
the
you'll
diversity
also
of
be
life
given a
on
copy
Earth
of the
is due
Mickelson's
to
best-selling
evolution,
book,
the
The Freedom
process by
Shortcut,
which
with
the
more
different
resources to help
organisms
you
on
get
the
started.
planet
So you'll
developed and
definitely want to check that
diversified
out too.
from earlier
With that
forms.
said,
And I am
click
willing
the
to
link
bet
now for the free
most
video
of you
training
have
on what we found
experience
is the best
with
way to make
evolution.
extra income in your
Give
spare
you an
time.
example from when I was a younger human, and I had a son who was prone to ear infections. And what happened, this is Joshua's eardrum, okay? What happens in an ear infection is one little prokaryotic cell, one little bacterial cell lands in Josh's ear. And then that bacterial cell replicates its DNA and splits asexually into two daughter cells. And then those daughter cells do the same, and pretty soon we have a pile of cloned prokaryotic cells doing things that inflame Josh's ear. He comes to me and he says, "Mom, my ear hurts." We go off to the doctor. The doctor prescribes an antibiotic. It wipes out almost all the bacteria and Josh feels better. Dun, dun, dun. What's that? What do you think that is, that red bacterium?
I have no idea.
I'm gonna tell you. It's why they pay me the big bucks. This bacterium derived from an ancestor whose DNA was copied incorrectly. There was a mistake in her copying, well, it's not a she, in the copying of the DNA. A random mistake. It so happens that that mistake in the copying of the DNA rendered this particular bacterial cell resistant to the antibiotic. Just by accident, by a random mistake. We call those mistakes mutations. So Josh feels fine after he finishes the antibiotic, but a few weeks later, he comes back and says, "Mom, my ear hurts again." And we go back to the doctor, and sure enough, he has an ear infection, but we can't give Josh the same antibiotic because this is now a clone of replicated bacteria who by chance carry a mutation, making them resistant to that antibiotic. So now we have to go to a different antibiotic, but in the meantime, another mutant bacterium shows up that very well might be resistant to whatever next antibiotic we throw at Josh's ear. This is evolution. It is the change in the characteristics of a population over time. It used to be a bunch of white guys with a red dot. Now it's a bunch of red guys with a green dot. A change in the composition of a population over time. This is just a slightly more formal way of describing evolution. You can find this sort of representation in any textbook in any textbooks in America. Certainly textbooks in Massachusetts. I don't speak for where Ron DeSantis lives, but these are the components of evolution. And if these three things are going on, then there will be evolution. So the first thing is there is variation among the organisms in the population, and the ultimate source of that variation is a random process, the random process of a mistake, a mutation in the copying of the gene. And we saw it here. There is variation in the population, and we're seeing it here in our little bug population. There are brown bugs and green bugs. These mutations that occur randomly. These mistakes occur randomly. But the second part of evolution is not random at all. We call it differential reproduction, in which some organisms having particular traits out-reproduce other organisms. That is natural selection. That's the heart of natural selection. This is anything but random. This is a process that depends on the environment. Who gets to reproduce depends on the environment writ large. In this case, we've got a bunch of brown bugs and green bugs, and they're on a brown tree. That's part of the environment. There are visual predators that apparently distinguish the green bugs from the brown bugs. So think of natural selection as a sieve that permits some organisms with particular traits to reproduce in that environment. If you change the sieve, you change who gets to reproduce. And then the last piece of evolution is heritability. At least some component of the variation that permitted some organisms to out-reproduce others has to be heritable. There has to be a genetic component in those differences. And that leads to a change in the composition of a population over time. Now, there is a ton of evidence for evolution, and I'm just gonna pick out a couple that I like, but I'm sure you've all seen lots of this. Resemblance among extinct forms and living forms. This is trilobite. This is a living, it's actually called a trilobite cockroach, and which I've never run into, thank God. And you can see that they resemble one another, and the reason they resemble one another is they diverged from a common ancestor. I'm sure you've seen a fossil like this. This is Archaeopteryx, and it's got traits intermediate between both living birds and reptiles. You can see the feathers of Archaeopteryx. This is a artist's reconstruction of it. And the reason I show this is I'm hoping that you can see the other trait. This organism has teeth. Birds don't have teeth, they have feathers. Reptiles don't have feathers, they have teeth. So here's an organism with both traits, clearly an ancestor from which living birds and living reptiles diverged. This is one of my faves. It's one of my faves. These are two very closely related species of fish. This species lives out in the sunshine, I don't know if it's a lake or a sea. And this species has been sequestered for millennia in a cave. And what you can see is that this fish, along with not having pigment, but this fish has a vestigial eye, as though it went through the early developmental stages of making an eye and then stop it. And my question is, what would be the selective advantage for an animal to lose a trait? That's a serious question that I throw out to all but Arlene.
Conserving resources,
What do you mean, Courtney?
like conserving the energy to grow an eye, use it for something else.
Exactly right. There is variation in the population. Those guys that had some chance mutation that didn't make them go through all the energy expense of building a structure that won't serve them can put it elsewhere and out reproduce some other foolish guy who continues to make an eye. And recent literature is replete with an understanding of the genes that regulate particular morphological traits. Fascinating stuff. Here's another textbook kind of image. These are the forelimbs of a bunch of different vertebrates. And in every one, albeit with modification, everyone has a humerus. And the reason we all have humeruses is because we diverged from a common ancestor that had a humerus as well. You can, well, yeah. When I made this slide, I had to go back and find the original images because I couldn't remember which was the chick, which was the mouse embryo, because vertebrates in their early development go through very similar developmental stages, and it's only later in our development when particular genes kick on that we diverge from one another. Well, why is that? We evolved from a common ancestor. And then, of course, the piece of resistance is that the language of heredity is identical in all organisms. If, we can't see my organisms. Well, there we go. If I have a bunch of DNA that codes for the production of insulin in me, if I give that same length of DNA to a bacterial cell, that bacterial cell will translate it exactly the same way and crank out human insulin. So we humans have taken advantage of the fact that the code is the same for all organisms, and now we can crank out boatloads of human insulin and now only charge, what is it, $35 for it. Viruses are kind of a unique kind of critter in that they can't make viruses, they can't replicate themselves on their own, but they take advantage of the fact that they have the same code in their genetic material, and they recruit or co-opt the metabolic machinery of the organisms that they invade to make more virus particles on behalf of the virus. The code is identical because we all evolved from a common ancestor. I have found that my students don't quite understand what a common ancestor means. So I made this little, it's kind of a incomplete family tree of me. Here's me. And here are my sons, Josh and Noah. And here's my first cousin, Bonnie, and her daughters, Stephanie and Nicole. So if I ask, who shares a more recent common ancestor, Josh and Noah, or Noah and Stephanie, we can see, well, just go back one generation and you can see that Josh and Noah share the same common ancestor. And they in fact share roughly 50% of their genes, and they look alike and annoy me in similar ways. But if I want to find the common ancestor of Noah and Stephanie, we have to go back one generation. Betsy and Bonnie, nope. 2 generations. There's my mother, Ruth, and her sister, Natalie, nope. 3 generations. We have to go back 3 generations in order to find the common ancestor of Noah and Stephanie. So Noah and Stephanie are less closely related than Josh and Noah are. They share fewer of their genes, and you got to go back to find the common ancestor. I'm going to suck them in. Oh, they're too young. So I'm just going to replace the family tree with a couple of things, but same thing. We did not evolve from modern chimpanzees. We humans share a common ancestor with modern chimpanzees that lived, depending upon what you read, between 4 and 6 million years ago. So let's go back to our tree of life. The tree is trying to indicate for us who's more closely related to who diverged more recently from a common ancestor or more distantly from a more distant ancestor. And when I was in college, and maybe this is true for you too, we were taught the 5 kingdom classification scheme. You're young, how come you were taught that?
I'm not that young.
I was taught that.
You were taught, yeah, you're wicked old. So Carrie taught you. Okay, well.
High school, yeah.
Oh, high school, yeah. Well, it's still being taught, alas, in some high schools. But actually, Arlene, you and I were at Cornell at the time that Bob Whitaker published the 5 kingdom classification scheme, and he knew at the time it was wrong. He just wanted to give us a way in to ask questions about the diversity of life. But here's what Whitaker proposed. He put all these diverse guys, all the prokaryotes, into one kingdom, Monera, and then he stuck the animals in their own kingdom, having the same level in the hierarchy as all the Monerans, and the fungi and the plants and the ciliates had their own kingdoms. And as I said, he knew it was incorrect at the time, but he generated it as an hypothesis. And we've been picking away at it ever since, particularly with the advent of molecular biology. So now we talk about having these three domains, the so-called true bacteria, the so-called archaebacteria, and all of the eukarya are put in the same large domain. But what this tells us is that I, Betsy, am more closely related to a mushroom than this bacterium, this prokaryote, is to this prokaryote. Dum, dum, dum. No snide comments about me and mushrooms? Okay. Keep in mind, this is still an hypothesis. Nothing is written in stone. We're still investigating this. Now, this is an exercise I like to do with my students because none of us really have a sense of deep time. We're told the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. I have really no idea what that means. But if I scale the history of Earth to a 30-day calendar, it gives me some sort of metaphors that I can use to help me sort things out. So if Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and we scale it to a 30-day month, each day represents 150 million years. So right at the congealing of Earth at time 0 was on day 1. At the end of the day, 150 million years have transpired. So let's see what's cooking here. So we have all the matter that Earth is going to have, barring the meteors that come to Earth from time to time. When do things start cooking? Well, they don't start cooking for 1 billion years. It takes a week before we think there is evidence of, or 1 billion years transpiring, evidence of first cells, the prokaryotic cells. So, okay, we're good. Got a week. This can take off, right? Okay, here we go. Oops, nope. So we're halfway through our time here, and we now have an oxygen atmosphere. So 2 billion years have passed. We only have those very simple cells, and we now have a sufficient oxygen atmosphere accumulated so we can see evidence of it in the fossil record. So where'd that oxygen come from? Not Arlene, not Memily. Where'd the oxygen come from? Stephanie, you had better know, or I am calling Carrie.
The prokaryotes.
Bennington grads. Yeah, somehow there were mutations and combinations that permitted organisms to take the energy from the sun, permitted some early prokaryotes to take the energy from the sun and use that energy and pop off the hydrogen atoms from a water molecule and then smash those hydrogen atoms into CO2, making sugar. But then it's left with, once we pluck the hydrogen atoms off water, we got to do something. So just puff it out there. So oxygen, the oxygen atmosphere on our planet is the waste product of photosynthesis, which I rather like. So now we have cells, we have an oxygen atmosphere, things are going to really start clicking, right? Well, no. Finally, over a month has passed and we have evidence of the evolution of eukaryotic cells, those somewhat more complicated cells that have a nuclear membrane around their DNA and some different kinds of subunits inside them. And the evolution of these is so fascinating. So invite me back again. You'll have to feed me. So now we have everything. We've got oxygen, we've got complex cells. Now we're gonna start cooking with gas, get it? Nothing, nope, wait a minute, stuff is almost gone. Oh, finally, a few days ago, 650 million years ago, we have evidence of multicellular organisms. Wow. Whole lot of time has transpired on planet Earth for the evolution of multicellular organisms just a few days ago. Well, what about the dinosaurs? They evolved yesterday. Dinosaurs evolved yesterday. That must mean, oh, that was what, 250 million years ago? Yeah, day and a half ago. That must mean they went extinct today. Dinosaurs became extinct 9 hours ago. Well, where are we? Oh, we came on the scene about a minute ago, a minute before midnight on the last day. Now, please do not copy this image because somebody will say, Dr. Sherman said that dinosaurs and humans lived simultaneously. So we are real parvenus on planet Earth. And I want us to keep in mind how evolution works, how much time we've had, and yet all the things that we think of as organisms were just here for the last few days. And let's talk about how you go from a changing population to two populations, which we call different species. And there are a bunch of mechanisms that scientists have derived for how a single species becomes two. And this is a mechanism that we think holds true for many animal species. And it involves separating a single species, a single population into two by some geographic barrier. So here's a long time ago, and this mouse can make a baby with that mouse, and that mouse can make a baby with that mouse. But some sort of geologic barrier comes about and separates the two populations, or I'm sorry, separates the single population into two. It could be, well, in this case, it's a river. It could be erosion, floods, uplifts of ridges, volcanoes, and lava, and so on. Processes that we still see very readily on this planet. So for whatever reason, this single population is separated by a barrier that they can't pass. The second after this barrier is set down, if I were to pick up this mouse and bring it over here, she could still make a baby with that mouse. But over time, these two populations will diverge genetically as different mutations accumulate. As different mutations accumulate that are selected for by natural selection by the different sieves of these different environments. I don't know, maybe it's cold over here, so by chance, some mutation that keeps them warm and brown gave a selective advantage to these guys, where maybe it's hot on this side, so keeping a reflective fur would do better. But for whatever reason, these different genetic variations accumulate in the populations, such that when the barrier is removed, It says the river dries up. This looks like a paved road to me. But when the river is removed, there are so many differences between these two populations that they can no longer make a baby together. Well, we know how populations change over time. We know how much time we have. But what does that mean of how we name different species? And you'd think scientists would have this down, because we use the terminology all the time. What is a species? And in fact, we don't have it down. I kind of know one when I see one, but we don't have very good definitions for species. We have working definitions, so we know this gorgeous creature from Africa and this gorgeous creature from Africa can't make a baby together. They are clearly different species. But what about, oh, that's not making a baby together. What about this? Here is a donkey, here is a zebra, and you think, well, boy, those look like different species, and yet they can produce this exquisitely adorable creature. So these guys can't make a baby, these guys can. What's the difference? How come these guys can still make a baby, but I'll tell you, this baby is not going to be able to make other babies? So what might account for the fact that these guys, gals, guy and gal, can still make a baby together?
Maybe the speciation hasn't finished.
We are going to that bar afterwards. Exactly so. There has been insufficient time for sufficient mutations, divergent mutations to accumulate to separate these guys. So here's the beginning of Earth, and it's going like this. And here we are, and we take a snapshot. Oh, there's the snapshot. Okay, now we know this is a species. Well, evolution is ongoing. We are looking at an instant in time, trying to reconstruct what happened back there, trying to predict what will happen here. So we have to coin a term, species, so we can use it in talking with each other, but they are not fixed. Evolution is ongoing. Okay. There are so many misconceptions about evolution. It's hard to know which ones to pick, but I'll pick a couple. The first is that evolution is only a theory. And of course, colloquially, we use theory to mean, kind of a guess. I have a theory, it's gonna rain tonight, I'm gonna bring an umbrella. Well, but I have a theory, it's not gonna rain tonight, so I'm not gonna bring an umbrella. And my theory is just as valid as your theory. Evolution is only a theory, so other theories explaining the origin of the various species should be considered equally. But of course, to a scientist, a theory is sacred. It is the best compilation, analysis, and synthesis of all the data we have up to now. And its usefulness is that it generates testable hypotheses. So we keep refining our understanding of evolution. I think this one we did, Hugh Jackman was it. This one is somewhat problematic because biologists sometimes use this terminology as a shorthand. Mammals evolved so that they could maintain a high body temperature. And while it's much easier to say that than there was variation in the population, by chance, some early mammals had a mutation that permitted them to regulate their body temperature, and they were able to, it just takes too long. But I see this creeping into even textbooks and certainly into general media, and I just, want to emphasize that evolution is not purposeful. The substrate on which natural selection acts is all random stuff, random chemical stuff that happens. Okay. So we got evolution, we got time, we got species. Let's take a snapshot and look at the diversity of life on this planet right now. So this is from a fairly recent paper, and I like this figure because it shows us graphically the relative proportions of the various organisms on the planet in terms of their biomass, not in terms of numbers of species. This is, imagine we weighed all the plants, and we weighed all the bacteria and so on. So this represents the biomass of all the plants on the planet. This very big triangle is the bacteria. Here are the archaebacteria, the prokaryotes. If we looked at numbers of species, this would outweigh the plants by a lot, but we're just looking at the mass. But then look at this teeny tiny little purple triangle. This is the proportion of mass of animals on the planet right now. Let's blow that up, and figure B shows us relationships between the mass of the different kinds of animals on the planet. And it is no surprise that the arthropods take up the greatest proportion. Lobsters, you got your lobsters, but most of them are insects. You got your clams, but I want you to look at two blobs in particular. See this teeny tiny little purple triangle? That is the proportion of mass of wild birds currently, well, as of 2018. And down here, these three colors represent the mass of all the mammals. This is the biomass of livestock that we raise to keep us humming. And this teeny tiny orange triangle represents the mass of wild mammals on the planet. Was it always thus? Well, we have a lot of evidence that it wasn't. This came again from a fairly recent paper. On the x-axis is time. Here's 100,000 years ago when humans first evolved, and up more toward the present. And it's logarithmic, so we can simply squish a lot of data in there. On the red y-axis, we have the number of big animal species. And 100,000 years ago, there were a lot. Oh, now we're not doing biomass. Now we're doing numbers of species. And a huge number of big animal species. And on the right y-axis, the blue one, we see human population. And for many thousands of years, human population was quite low, and the big animal population was quite high. And something kind of mystical happens here about 10,000 years ago. And there's a huge increase in human population with a concomitant decrease in the megafauna on planet Earth. You know what was going on around 10,000 years ago? You may say, yes, Arlene was digging ditches. Human beings developed agriculture. We stayed in one place. We raised animals. We cut down crops we didn't want. We planted crops we did want. And from then on, we have changed Earth so dramatically. Here is a similar representation of those same data. Here we are 10,000 years ago when humans first began adopting agriculture, and in our scaled history of Earth, 4 seconds ago, 10,000 years ago was 4 seconds ago. 10,000 years ago, Most of the critters were wild animals. By 1900, the wild animal proportion was radically reduced. This is livestock, this is us. Here we are at 2000. You can barely see the block representing the biomass of wild animals. This is livestock. And this is humans. And here's the projection for 2050. The band representing wild animals is very narrow. This is not a shock to any of you, I am quite sure. Both the general media and scientific literature is replete with articles about defaunation, removal of animals in the Anthropocene, genetic diversity loss in the Anthropocene, global decline of freshwater megafauna, more than 75% decline of total insect biomass, and on it goes. This was a very disturbing paper I read a couple of years ago, describing the loss of bird fauna in North America. This is likely not a surprise to you either. Over half of known human pathogenic diseases can be aggravated by climate change. And this is a paper I came across fairly recently, and I didn't know what the title meant, Societal Extinction of a Species, and I'll just read it. The ongoing global biodiversity crisis not only involves biological extinctions, but also the loss of experience and the gradual fading of cultural knowledge and collective memory of species. Mommy, what's a white rhino? So here's a serious question. Oh, I'm schwitzing a little. I'm gonna just take a dab. Talk among yourselves. Okay. Is there an intended state of nature? This is kind of an important question. My students bemoan the loss of polar bears. Oh, polar bears. I shouldn't tease because they are genuine in their concern. But I say, okay, so what are we gonna do? Well, we have to restore the environment. Okay, so we restore the icebergs to 50 years ago. Why stop 50 years ago? Why not 10,000 years ago? Restore Earth back to that composition of matter, living and Or what about 200,000 years ago? Or what about 60 million years ago? Let's restore the planet to when the dinosaurs were living. And they begin to see the absurdity of it. But what I hope it impresses upon us is that there is no intended state of nature. Extinctions have occurred throughout the history of Earth, and most scientists who study this stuff think most of the species that ever lived on the planet are now extinct. Stephen Jay Gould had a really interesting conceit in one of his books. He asked us to take Earth now and then run the tape backwards and start now. It's 4.5 billion years ago, and all the atoms are in the same place as they were 4.5 billion years ago, and then let the tape run forward again. Do you think that there would be a Betsy 4.5 billion years later? Would there be a tissue box? What's your name? You're fabulous.
Tanya.
Tanya. Would there be a Tanya? The exquisite improbability of us sometimes just like blows my mind. Nah. So if there is no intended state of nature, why are we all up in arms? This, I threw in because, it's from one of my field sites. That I took maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It's from a coral reef, and you can see there's beautiful live coral there. Big coral there, big coral there. There's a lot of soft coral, quite diverse animal life. And this is what that same coral looks like now. The coral is all dead. And there's a monoculture of macroalgae that's clotting the reef, which doesn't support at all the organisms that used to live there. There is no intended state of nature. Extinctions have been going on forever and ever and ever. Why should we care? And more than that, how do we make an argument with some guy who says, yeah, well, dinosaurs are extinct too. Give me my gasoline. And I don't have the answer, of course, but I have the answer, an answer that I came to maybe 20 years ago. But why we should care is because the consequences of these twin inseparable phenomena of climate change and biodiversity loss means that people will suffer. Human beings have been suffering as a consequence of it and will continue to suffer in the future. And that is unacceptable to me. I'm sure you've been reading about climate change refugees who can no longer farm their lands, or there's drought, or there's God knows so much heat, not enough water. This will only get worse. Now, what is different about the extinctions that occurred before humans and those that are being caused by us beginning 10,000 years ago, but really accelerating in the last 200,000 years, or I'm sorry, 200 years ago or so, is the rate at which we are causing this cataclysm. If you're a bacterium, you can pop out a mutation and make a whole bunch of babies in 20 minutes. But if you're a whale, popping out a mutation and having it change your population so you can accommodate a hotter ocean, it's going to take a long time. The rate at which we are causing a change in our environment and the destruction of species has, as far as I have read, never been experienced by this planet before. So I can't leave you like this. All is not lost. There have been some real success stories, some just in the United States, some worldwide. All these important acts in the 70s were signed by President Nixon, who would, I guess, be considered a wild radical now. The Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, all signed by President Nixon. And there are estimates of the hundreds of thousands of human beings who have been saved by the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. The effectiveness of the Clean Water Act, as perhaps you might have read, has been constrained by a recent Supreme Court decision curtailing the EPA's oversight of certain surface waters, elevating their own understanding of the natural world above that of scientists. But I'm not bitter. So I'll give you a couple of little happy things.
Brought back from the brink of extinction.
Come on. It's cute, right? I have plants in the title. There's a plant brought back from the brink of extinction. This, of course, is a wonderful story, how the American peregrine falcon was rescued. Plants, snakes, my personal favorite, the magazine mountain snail. So Go out and do good things. Vote as if your life depended on it and those of your descendants. Make good trouble. And I thank you so much for your kind attention. I will accept questions, or depending upon the time, I have such a sexy video, but it's up to you all.
Video.
Oh, now I have to do the thing, don't I? End show. Get it? Yeah, skip that. Okay. Oh, I need sound on this one. Let's see. Because the guy talks. How you doing, Courtney?
Hold on, I can't keep up. What's it called?
It's on the slide after both slide. Well, yeah.
How to open your car door while
Come to the library. Tell me one.
Video. Okay, I'm good.
So,
submerged underwater. A fatal construction flaw in all recent automobiles makes it
Your volume.
my volume is as turned as it's going to be, but
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it.
this bacterium to survive that slightly higher level of antibiotics.
When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Antibiotic-resistant bacterium, go to a hospital. So,
how to open your car door while it's
question, Dr. Wyman.
In the graph of 100,000 years ago, 10,000, 1,000, showing the decline of the number of species.
One was species, one was biomass, yep.
Right, it's a biomass one, and around the time of agriculture, it dropped.
Yeah.
And then it seemed to level
Off, yeah.
What do you think that's about?
Don't know. How's that for an answer? I don't know. I noticed that as well. And I could venture some guesses.
Oh, go on.
Well, there was a glacier. You know, so I don't know how that affected things. It got cold, but I did notice it, and I When we go home later, as I am eating your cauliflower, I'll consult the original paper, but I don't know.
Okay.
Tanya,
Don't you think there are a lot of cultural impacts on how all of this happened?
yes, but
Yes.
say more.
And, well, with how easily it is for cultures to interchange and get together, we're introducing other plants that don't belong in our environment, and still they take off.
Yeah.
And they become problems.
Yes,
So that's, I mean, we're responsible for a lot of that.
we're responsible for the last 200 years of biodiversity destruction. The whole history of the planet is that evolution was kind of local. And there were boundaries between different ecosystems, but now the world is one ecosystem. We can send a boat from Singapore over to California, and we can fly, and we can have ballast in our boats that bring mussels and
They dump them in the shore where they don't belong.
yeah, the question of belonging though is, I mean, of invasive species. I mean, we're kind of right up there.
Yeah.
We're just African. Bill and Arlene are tending these honeybees of theirs that are invasive. There were no honeybees back in the day. Earthworms, there were no earthworms back in the day.
North America.
In North America, sorry. Actually, point Ted, that's one Ted, don't do it again. So yes, certainly the mobility of humans and our curiosity about one another.
Well, on a micro scale, there was about 5,000 years ago, there was something called the hypsithermal. I'm an archaeologist, so we get into long range thing.
5,000 years you think is long range, sweetheart?
No, 5
Nothing.
million would be longer, but,
Yeah, we
Yeah,
were
but-
around, you
but
can't
we're-
blame me 5.
but we're looking at that because the Native Americans, it was a warming period, and the Native Americans had to adapt to that. And one of the adaptations is that hickory trees were very much more available in New England. So the kind of work that I used to do was look at charred plant remains from archaeological sites in New England, only there. And I'd find a lot of hickory nuts burned in a context which would have been a hearth or a trash bin or something like that.
And what did you conclude from that?
Well, that's what they were eating, and they must have had access to the hickory trees.
That's what
So
humans
that
do.
helps explain their culture and how things happen. But then that dropped off as it cooled off. I don't know huge amounts about the hypsithermal.
I've never heard it till tonight, but it does sound pretty good. So I don't know that level of minutia. It's not unlike the annoying question Marlene asked about why this leveling off. I simply don't know. Did anybody? Bueller?
I think the hickories will be coming back.
Because
We'll be moving north.
oh
To New England. We have hickories, but not that many.
yeah.
Maybe because it's warming up.
But remember, there's no intended state of nature. So what's your bottom line?
We
My
have to
bottom line
adapt.
is the suffering of humans.
Hmm.
So
So Betsy, what's your attitude towards efforts to slow down invasive species?
it's a good question. You are redeemed. For some, I think it's bailing out the Titanic with a thimble. There's a comparable kind of activity that's going on in which scientists don't agree. It's called restoration ecology. Have you heard the term? And the argument is, well, for example, in corals, what scientists are doing is removing corals from the sea and bringing them into the laboratory and trying to encourage them to make mutations that will give them greater resistance to the hot seas. The arguments against that are, first, it has been singularly unsuccessful, and it's been tried now for about 20 years. Another is that if you just save them for a little bit and then put them back in the patient who continues to smoke, it's not doing anything. And some scientists have argued it makes us feel too good that we're doing such a good job of saving the environment when we should be turning off the CO2 spigot or stop putting up that damn condo at the beach. So I'm at sea about it, Ted. I don't know what the right thing to do is.
Well, there are examples of invasive species that are good. And
Yeah.
I mean, who decides good? But like, does the bee population explode because of an invasive species here, but then it dies over here?
Oh, no, they're typically not.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about those mussels that invaded Lake Champlain. They're still very happy as clams in Asia. So no, that doesn't appear. It seems that when you bring a new species into an environment, a bunch of things can happen. It can flame out, which is probably what mostly happens, but it doesn't have predators. It has some unique attributions that permit it to grow, and if it doesn't have anything chomping down on the organisms, it'll continue to grow. We've seen that with lionfish in the Atlantic, and it's funny because they're just exquisite. You just love to look at them, but the story is that these Pacific lionfish, which are desirable aquarium fish, taken from the Pacific and landed in an aquarium in Florida, and somehow they were let go in the Atlantic, and within a matter of 10 years, populations of lionfish all up and down from Brazil all the way up to Rhode Island, and the modern fish or the native fish don't know how to eat them, and they eat the lionfish, eat everybody, so they've made an impact on the diversity of the coral reef. What some governments tried to do is encourage divers to shoot these lionfish with spears and then introduce them to the native predators so that the native predators would see, oh, this is yummy, we can eat this. But Arlene is nodding her head. What we've seen is what the fish have learned is when you see a diver with a long snail, follow him because you're going to get a free meal. And they have not learned to take the invasives on their own.
But see, those are cultural impacts.
Yeah, those social evolution.
Well, explain what is cultural.
Well,
I agree with you. I just,
when people live in one place, they develop a way of doing things. And it can vary their boundary maintaining mechanisms, even with their neighbors. They might have a different way of doing things. And so they either learn from each other or they learn not to do it.
well, with regard to the lionfish, I blame North Americans. Because here are some pretty fish in the Pacific. I want them in my aquarium. So people in Indonesia who are very poor say, okay, we're gonna get you some lionfish. What we're gonna do is we're gonna dynamite the reef and all the fish will float up and we'll capture these gorgeous fish. Maybe 30% of them will live. And then we'll ship them to you North Americans who have too much time on your hands. And you can put them in your aquarium. So I associate this with the unbounded greed of first world folks.
A question online. Do organisms evolve faster when they're complex? That seems counterintuitive.
Evolve faster. Well, if you have a short generation time, so that a mutation occurs more readily than if you have a long generation time. These short generation time organisms can evolve more rapidly than long generation time organisms. But another component of how fast populations can evolve is the level of genetic diversity in those populations. And that is not necessarily synonymous with a short generation time.
I have a question kind of along the same line, which is going back to the jewel wasp.
Mm.
There are so many different things that happen in the interaction between the wasp and the cockroach. Are there intermediate types of interactions like that seen? You know, are there other types of wasps that do some of that, but not all of that?
That's a great question. And I would imagine yes, because if one looks at, not as though they're on their way to doing something, but again, this is the snapshot we are taking. And there are bees that live solitary lives. There are bees that stay with their mommy for one summer. And then there are the bees that stay with their mommies overwintering. And so we can see a continuum of phenotypes, but not that they're on their way to becoming that. But here's another weird thing. There are parasites on the parasites. Some other parasite could come and lay its egg inside the egg of the wasp. And so it goes.
Parasites all the way down.
I'm wondering about the rate of mutation, like calculations now that we have a whole genome in a computer. Can we sort of use it to measure time, or?
We certainly have computer models that would start back. We can calculate mutation rates based on experience with a particular species. But the fidelity of the copying of the DNA is itself a trait. And there can be mutations in the genes that keep you more or less faithful in your copying of your genes. And well, what would the selection pressures be on an organism who happened to pop up a mutation that said, don't copy so quickly, or don't copy so accurately? Well, in a changing environment, that may, so
it's like,
there are all these conundrums, and the more we learn, the more we question it. But boy, biology was not like this when I was in school.
So something strikes me as odd, and that is that the whole concept of evolution is based on something you call random. And yet, isn't that a scientific way of saying we just don't understand what it is?
Oh, could be, except quantum mechanics. At the heart of nature is randomness. I do not know how to explain this. I have learned I must simply accept it. Yes, we call it random. Are there particular mechanisms associated with why this particular gene was badly copied? I assume so. And we know how to create mutations. We zap a blob of bacteria with ultraviolet radiation. We know we're going to create mutations, but we don't know that we're going to create that mutation.
Right. So there must be some mechanism that does it, that someday we will understand on some level. I mean, at some atomic level or something, but it can't be just random.
You and Einstein agree, but I am persuaded. Oh, well, I used to date him. So. I get what you're saying. We just simply don't know enough. But I think that random to a physicist is exactly that. It is random. It is Schrodinger's cat. And certainly in maybe not my lifetime, but my grandchildren's lifetime, we will find out more about how mistakes are either prevented or encouraged.
Yeah.
Whether those mistakes will ever be directional, boy, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Doubt it. You're a dean, Ted, you know, it's good. Who are you and why do you keep emailing?
George.
Sir.
I'm given early on when you were presenting a kind of classic picture of evolution, talking about you have to separate a population into two portions.
It's a mechanism, but yes.
You know, it can be temporal, it can be geographic, it can be different things. But given how we're one ecosystem now, with the airplanes and the boats and everything else, do you think that a huge percentage of the species, all the way from protists all the way on up, are going to have the opportunity to try out almost every environment? There is no longer, this only grows in China. This does not grow in the, and given that we're going to have, for example, the algae you showed overgrowing the coral, the second part of the question is, given that there's going to be all this spread, given science that now has ideas about using things like CRISPR, that you can start implanting killer genes. There are attempts with mosquitoes saying, you know, we can make the most fertile mosquitoes have something that when they pass it on will make everybody they met with infertile. And the models are that you'll eventually get rid of a certain species of mosquito. It's not working perfectly, but those ideas are there. And so what I'm wondering is, way ahead in the future, are humans using the newest techniques in science going to be deciding what species make it? If you could kill all the microalgae, what would be the effects? Did anybody care?
We would lose oxygen.
Pardon?
We would lose oxygen. We would care.
Oh, if you killed all the photosynthetic organisms,
Right.
yes.
All the
But what if you only did a part of it? Well, I mean, we think we're very smart how to do this, and I understand that we're not. But I'm really wondering, where are we headed? We can save
already
a few
decided.
species.
We've already decided
Which
what species live or die. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. Will this new molecular technology give us new tools? Undoubtedly. Will we make wise decisions? If past experience is any guide, no. I have a hard time being optimistic. I think there's going to have to be a whole lot more suffering and death before it stops. And I am the first to admit I lack the imagination to consider how human beings might survive. But I remain not hopeful. If we do survive, however, it will be because of our technologies. It won't be because we will ourselves to not consume. I just don't think we've got that in us. I certainly don't.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.